The issues of information neutrality, library advocacy, censorship, and intellectual freedom are all the more poignant with recent events in Israel and Gaza. What is true? What is false? Who is moral? And who is immoral? Innocent people have been slain on both sides of the conflict. The murder of innocents is routinely condemned, but throughout history, as now, such deaths embolden the aggrieved to respond in kind. In today's library world, librarians increasingly declare themselves to be experts at curating information towards deciding for others what is and what is not misinformation, and promoting particular belief systems, particularly those in the context of what is called social justice. But what happens when counter-advocacy groups, even within the American Library Association, lock horns? When two ideologically driven groups, again, even within the LA, advocates ideas that believe, in the vernacular of today, their nemesis to be spreading fake news? What if such an advocacy faction speaks in the name of the entire ALA organization for a social justice platform that is considered by others within the ALA and beyond to be a moral falsehood? What happens when one advocacy faction takes on another, both under the banner of social justice, both claiming the higher moral ground, both within the American Library Association, but one faction wields more power than the other in vanquishing its rival's own activist notion of truth and its own claim to irrefutable facts? At core, what happens when the ALA abandons the posture of information neutrality about social and political issues, abandons being even-handed in providing a wide range of information to the public, proclaiming that one set of facts are true and others are false, and should be ignored, and leans heavily one way in what can become a profoundly emotional socio-political abyss? Let's look here for a poignant example. The issue of Israel, the American Library Association, and questions of intellectual freedom, political advocacy, propaganda, and censorship, all entwined, have arisen in the past. And despite illusory ALA claims, the results underscore how malleable ideas about free speech actually are, even subject to overt political bludgeoning, even within that library organization, and how ideological factions have battled each other to highlight their respective views at the expense of the other, underscoring the inevitable connection between advocacy and its attendant censorship, one way or another, all the while under the ALA's preposterously tattered banner proclaiming its holy allegiance to an illusory intellectual freedom.
Do you think there is a place in the values of librarianship for neutrality in light of the current challenges facing the profession?
When you're highly politicized, neutrality becomes very difficult. I think, it's a topic I've thought a lot about, and I'm a materialist. I believe in the real world that if I buy this book, I can't buy that book, right? That like budgets are limited, shelf space is limited, work is limited, and so it's hard to sort of make an argument for neutrality when, just at the level where we got to make a decision about things.
If all perspectives of an issue aren't fairly provided by libraries for the public to make up their own minds, if the American Library Association and libraries in general are increasingly comfortable in taking sides and pushing social and political agendas, they should be regarded today as what they are fast becoming: merely propaganda centers guided ultimately by, with any issue, an ideological movement that is more powerful in silencing the claims of social and political rivals and, as always, all claim the higher moral ground. Let's examine how malleable the idea of intellectual freedom is and the hypocrisies at work in the heart of the American Library Association in a past case of Israel and the Palestinians. The traditional role of libraries and the ALA used to be to provide people access to a wide spectrum of information, not advocacy for any side, to make up their own minds about anything, affording the public alternative perspectives about controversial issues without prejudice in one direction. Abandoning information neutrality opens the door to the poison of propaganda and factional power plays, both antithetical to genuine intellectual freedom. The story here happened about 30 years ago, and information about it is readily available on the internet. Its foibles remain profoundly relevant today. A graduate student, Adam Chandler, even wrote a thesis about this. The internal struggle of the American Library Association over an ALA resolution that condemned, quote, Israeli censorship and other human rights violations, unquote. In the name of the entire American Library Association, this resolution was passed by its former council at an annual conference in 1992 and then revoked at the next one. What changed? What changed was that opposing factions for social justice fought it out, and one was vastly more powerful than the other. One faction decided to herald its perception of truth and social justice for the entire organization, and another faction managed to revoke, in essence, censor it. As one librarian, Blair Kuntz, assessed, quote, the ALA had directed similar calls against such countries as the United Kingdom, China, the Soviet Union, and South Africa, and these resolutions had not been considered controversial, unquote. They were not considered controversial because there was not a forceful concerted activism by defenders of those countries against such ALA proclamations. This resolution story began when a member of the American Library Association, David Williams, a librarian in Chicago, compiled a bibliography about Israel and its alleged censorship and human rights violations against the Palestinians, and he initiated a campaign within the ALA to take a public stand on those issues. Williams met resistance early on from ardent supporters of Israel, both within and beyond the library world, who claimed his bibliography was biased and the premises of the proposed ALA resolution indicting Israel were untrue. Williams had initial backing from some other librarians, including a number of Jewish ones, especially those at an ALA subdivision called the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, a unit that is probably seminal in the rise of social justice advocacies in today's ALA. As divisions over such issues deepened in the library world and the resolution language was parsed, more than one Jewish librarian who supported the resolution eventually accused Williams, its founder, of anti-Semitism. One of these librarians, Sanford Berman, also advocated for a kind of censorship of an ALA unit, calling, quote, for the abolition of the Israeli Censorship and Palestinian Libraries Task Force, which was chaired by David Williams, unquote. In 1994, something called the Social Responsibilities Roundtable Action Council did abolish. Is this not a form of censorship? The ALA group Williams led. Blair Kuntz, a librarian at the University of Toronto and a critic of Israel, argues online that there was an undergirding, quote, smear campaign, unquote, against Williams. Once the ALA's original condemnation of Israel was passed, pro-Israel activists rose en masse with pressure to rescind the document. This included many Jewish librarians and their supporters, including, instrumentally, beyond the library context, the Hadassah Jewish Women's Organization, the Jewish Federation, and the influential Anti-Defamation League, which is alleged to be, among other things, to use Adam Chandler's term for this genre of social activism, a, quote, pro-Israel lobby, unquote. There was even discussion at an ALA conference, says Chandler, that, quote, the Anti-Defamation League operates an intelligence network, unquote, highlighted by a controversial presentation by Jewish author Jeffrey Blankfort that argued a, quote, relationship between the Israeli intelligence unit Mossad and the ADL, unquote. But, wrote Adam Chandler in another venue, quote, the theme of his talk was how Israeli censorship in the occupied territories has spread into the U.S. using proxies like the ADL to stifle free expression in organizations like the ALA, unquote. The Anti-Defamation League was even alleged to have, in the words of ALA librarian Blair Kuntz, quote, spied on and compiled files on people who had attended meetings the ADL considered anti-Israel, unquote. The result of such social justice advocacy, in this case initially critical of Israel, within the American Library Association underscores the dangers of the ALA taking sides in social and political wars and the many libraries that look to it for guidance. There are certainly dozens, perhaps hundreds, thousands of current issues that have a social justice content, and library visitors are best served by providing a broad range of information, including alternative and competing views, not advocacy, for people to make up their own minds about controversies of the day. In this case, a particular ideological agenda was pushed, decreed to be based on irrefutable facts in the broad name of the ALA, and a counter-advocacy group rose to effectively censor that effort with their own claim to objective facts, succeeding in even erasing an existing ALA unit. How is the quest for truth and intellectual freedom served here? With first an advocacy, a lobbying effort, and then an opposing advocacy response that effectively censors the first, in large part by virtue of its own counter-lobbying efforts. People should advocate for what they believe in and be active in fighting for what they think is just and moral, but a librarian exploiting his or her position to promote their own ideological view is morally bankrupt. A library should be a balanced, neutral resource for inquirers to make up their own minds. A library's purpose should never be to be a promotional tool for any librarian's personal belief, which guarantees individual bias and prejudice at cost to the wider community. Truth is best served when all perspectives are fairly represented in open access. That used to be the supposed purpose of a library. I have a strong opinion about Israeli policies towards the Palestinians. It is a well-informed opinion. I lived in Israel for a year. Many things there troubled me, and I have many criticisms of the Jewish state, even before the disastrous current news that, with so many deaths on both sides, is a moral quagmire. I condemn Israel's reaction to October the 7th and its atrocities against Palestinian civilians, as I condemn the evils of Hamas. And I have the right to voice my views. But no one should have the right to commandeer a library like those librarians who declare themselves to be virtuous despite being a kind of pirate overrunning a ship, and wave their posters about what they believe to be true in an environment that should be fair and neutral, wherein all sides get their say, equal time, equal material, to prove their points. Lobbying efforts and systemic bias are evidenced everywhere about many subjects in our society, from the mass media to today's cancel culture universities. But we are talking about libraries here and a balanced access to evidence. We must have faith in people's intelligence and morality that when provided a full and balanced range of information, including arguments from different sides of any given issue, they will come to reasoned and ethical conclusions. Poised with access to all information from a position of information neutrality, people can then decide what makes sense to them. This is foundation upon which democracy and justice thrives. And this entails the overthrow of today's self-anointed gods of truth in the information world, who arrogantly worship their own sense of moral invincibility, an arrogance that exemplifies many of today's librarians who dare to declare for you what they consider to be absolutely true as self-declared expert curators of misinformation. Whichever side you stand on any given issue, especially in today's so-called culture wars, Advocacy destroys trust, with the recognition that not all views are being fairly represented. And as evidenced here, when the Middle East explodes in our faces at a library reference desk in, say, a rural town in Nebraska, the quest for any kind of objective truth and intellectual freedom can become simply a power contest between warring lobbies, enemies of both each other and the eroding purpose of the once trusted library. You got a mind